Yes, colleagues, we're going to start our presentation, so I would like to ask kindly the speakers to take their seats here around this table. The Coalition Energy Reforms monitors the implementation of the agreement regarding the accession of Ukraine to the energy community, and then the association agreement since the year 2012. Every year we fix different assessments. We had the periods when we fixed actually the lack of any progress altogether. There were periods when we actually registered very fast and high quality progress, and this year we witnessed and recorded the progress, but actually the speed of that progress was a bit decreased with the first years after the Revolution of Dignity. Every year we tried to demonstrate our report in some visual picture to actually demonstrate where we have barriers or hindrances, etc. This year we selected the topic of transportation transmission, so we'll read and we'll see in our report different kinds of transportation, different bottlenecks, etc., and blockages. Our main idea is as follows, that here in this country, in the energy sector, we have enough tools, enough instruments, we have enough vehicles to drive, so to say, we have enough fuel to continue our movement, but we have to better coordinate our efforts in order to avoid possible jams or bottlenecks or some barriers which we can create ourselves sometimes. And this can actually accelerate our movement towards the implementation of the association agreement in the energy sector. We have well-known experts, and each of them are going to offer their analysis of the progress and implementation of the above-mentioned agreement in the energy sector. But before that, I would like to give the floor to the Mr. Johannes Baur, EU Delegation in Ukraine, because this actually study and this project is financed with the support of the European Union. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Olena. Thank you for the invitation. Very glad to be here at this presentation of this monitoring report. Indeed, we think that continued dialogue between civil societies, NGOs, think tanks, and state authorities is important everywhere, and in particular also in Ukraine, to see what is happening, to get a feedback on the progress of reforms. That is also one of the reasons why we support non-state actors, NGOs, and also DiXi in particular, in order to bring also a different picture on what is happening in the energy sector, and therefore we welcome also very much this presentation of this report, which is certainly a useful tool, not only for us, but I think also for the government to see how the progress is evaluated. Now, in terms of implementation of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, we welcome very much, in particular, that the government and also together with the Rada have agreed on a joint roadmap to implement this association agreement. I think this is a very important step forward, which was made just recently, earlier this year, and which should help also making progress in areas of the association agreement where so far the progress was much limited, and even much more limited than in the energy sector. We also, of course, have our own cooperation framework on the evaluation of progress. We have regular meetings in the context of the association agreement, And we also have, in addition to that, a memorandum of understanding signed in 2016 between the European Commission specifically and the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy, specifically on energy, which also contributes to the evaluation of progress made. And there we just had 2 weeks ago a meeting here in Kiev to see how progress is ongoing. What are for us the main priorities? I think they have not changed over time very much, but some of them are getting now more and more critical than others. One of the first one is certainly the establishment of an independent regulator, where we look forward to the finalization of the selection procedure for the new leadership of the commissioners of the regulator. And we hope then that also with this new leadership, the regulator can, in a way, restart its work and cooperate with the different stakeholders, but of course keep an independent role, which is such crucial for the further implementation of the reforms. Second priority, of course, the implementation of the gas and electricity market reforms, where the important laws have been adopted, but the implementation is, well, let's say at a different level. In particular for gas, of course, there are important tasks ahead with the plan of the government to involve a European TSO into the management of the Ukrainian gas pipeline system, which would, in our view, significantly help to, first of all, ensure correct implementation of EU-compliant legislation for the transmission system operator, but equally important, maybe as important, yes, to strengthen the chances for Ukraine to keep significant volumes of gas transit flowing from Russia to the European Union. So this is, of course, very important. We also think that the reform of the public service obligation systems in the gas sector is key. For the time being, an important part of the Ukrainian gas market is, in a way, not really subject to market conditions, and this is something which, in our view, has to change, while keeping the protection for vulnerable consumers in Ukraine. And there, we are also in discussions with the Ukrainian government and hope to find a solution which is acceptable and in compliance with the Energy Community Treaty and the Association Agreement. Of course, these remain important challenges for the Ukraine, also in the electricity sector, of course. Now an important number of secondary legislation is developed, but all this has to be implemented. This has to be tested on the ground, and so that an open and competitive market can start as foreseen after the end of the transition period. This is also a very, very important task. We are also involved in the reform of state-owned enterprises. I think some progress has been made there, but of course that also has to be continued, as well as regarding the privatization of state-owned enterprises in the energy sector planned by the government. This is also something which, of course, will be very important in order to establish a truly competitive, in particular, electricity market in Ukraine. So these are briefly our priorities, and we look forward to the presentation of the report and to the input. Thanks.
Дуже дякую, пане Баур. Зараз якраз і буде нагода.
Thank you very much. We actually we stand the chance now to check where we are and take into consideration the opinion of our experts. And I would like to give the floor to Roman, representative of DiXi Group, who is going to present the analysis of what's going on in the gas sector. Thank you. Olena, the reforms in the gas sector until recently were regarded as one of the most progressive ones. But we, and not only we, but also the energy community, also speaks a number of the delays or what has to be done in order to bring the situation here closer to the European standards. We already mentioned the issue of unbundling of the function of transportation and storage from the functions of supply and delivery of gas. Unbundling is a term. So the restructuring which is required by the third energy package. The barrier we have is as follows. Despite the fact that Ukraine actually won the transmission dispute against Gazprom, but it did not mention the delegation of the commitments regarding the implementation of this contract to another party. That actually they can guarantee the delegation of the authorities to another operator, which has been established by the government, actually, which was preceded by huge preparatory efforts, which was mentioned in the letter to the government from the manager of the gas. We have to study whether that unbundling model, which was actually was entertained in July 2017 and was mentioned by a special governmental resolution. We have to analyze that and see what is required to implement. And we believe that we have to have a meeting with the legal advisors and the expert of the European legislation to understand what changes or what transformation we do require, whether we have the unbundling model for the ownership rights or some kind of transition models. Transition models we need to introduce before the contract expires, let's say, which can actually limit our field of maneuvers, let's say. And of course, we don't have to use that as the let's say, as the reason to slow down the reform. We have to continue this reform. Maybe the government has to start the search for our Western partner, and it is obvious that it is necessary to launch or to continue the consultations and to launch the tender, the competition, if you will, and to determine the partner who will help Ukraine to reform our existing gas transportation, gas transmission system. This is also important in the context mentioned by Mr. Baur, in the context of providing transit after 2019. One of the next jams, bottlenecks, which Ukrainian gas market can encounter, this is the lack of the guaranteed amount of pumping the gas or gas going through our gas transmission system starting with January 1, 2020. We understand in order to prove the advantages of Ukrainian route and to involve the respective gas pipelines, we need not only the political arguments, but they are important, but we also have to have some economic stimuli, and this is a part of the homework which we still have to do. We are talking about a revision of the tariffs, input and output tariffs of the gas transmission systems, and after the Stockholm arbitration court ruling, there were some grounds to introduce not the accelerated, maybe less accelerated, but the usual, let's say, transportation to make our tariffs more attractive than Nord Stream 2 or some other similar projects. Speaking about the prospects after the 2020, we believe it is necessary to develop several scenarios how our system is going to operate, what would be the modes of the loads, what kind of capacities we need to do that, and how we can introduce the changes or, let's say, amendments into the existing network or grid for this system to work or to operate efficiently. As regards the end consumer, there is an issue. We have to Ukraine has to open the retail market for the, let's say, for the households, and the wholesale market for the thermal energy or heat energy for the Ukrenergo, in order to ensure necessary level of competition. And the delay in the amendments or the provisions regarding the special commitments, that was the reason why back in 2017 the case was launched against Ukraine on the part of the Secretariat of the Energy Community. Since those days, since August 2017, we have been involved in the regular negotiations both with the Energy Community and the International Monetary Fund. And it's important for us to think here not only about the price, which has to move towards the market prices, but also to remove the hindrances or the barriers which do not allow today the households, in other words, the ordinary people, to select their own the supplier and to select the best proposal on the market. And here we speak not about the gradual leveling of the prices. Must be there some kind of the transition period. We have to preserve the protection of the vulnerable consumers. We say that we have to change the system of subsidies. We have this year in order to introduce or to prepare for introduction of the monetization of the subsidies on the level of the consumers. My colleagues are going to talk about that. Perhaps we are talking about some kind of, at least we can think about some of the proposals or ideas to try to test this mechanism within the framework of some of the pilot project in order to have by the year 2020 some kind of the tested model. And the last thing which pertains to our technical issue of introduction of the threshold balancing, which is very important for the business to ensure the risks. In May we are going to start testing the system, and in the beginning of August this year we have to introduce the system, and we expect to Transgas and regulator will speed up this work in order for this system to start operating properly and to remove the concerns that this step will be postponed. Thank you. Thank you. The floor is given to Svitlana Holikova from the TransEnergoConsulting Company. Ukraine adopted the law on the electric power energy. Now the major challenge is how to do that in due time and efficiently. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me to speak here about the electric energy sector. When we compared our power sector, we tried to present the situation in the electric energy sector, the picture in the transport, and we thought that both things are interrelated. And this is the only commission which regulates both transport and electric power. Unfortunately, we do not have such a commission, though it was provided for by the association agreement, I mean the establishment of the coalition. But this year, last year, 2017, demonstrated in this electric power sector, this is something we just bought kind of the multi-pass ticket for the electric transport, but we don't know how much it costs. So we have the ticket, but unfortunately we have not calculated the price which must underpin this purchase of this ticket. And actually, we are talking about specific stop, whether they will be announced and we are going to make some stops or not, and whether we are following the proper road, actually. In the electric power sector, for the first time ever, they adopted the law on the electric energy market. This is a basic law, and several days we celebrate its first anniversary, let's say, in April this year. We have to celebrate some certain achievements and attainments, though the law started to it became entered into force with some delay, and it started with the Foundation Council operating under the Prime Minister office in August, when we have to introduce when this law is going to be come into force. They planned for the year 2019, and there are some things which already had to take place. We are talking about almost 100 legal acts regarding the adoption of the secondary legislation. Only 50% have been done. Also, my colleague also mentioned that the regulator works in a very unstable manner. Even we had some collapse in this sphere last year. Since March 23rd, the regulator again doesn't work, and despite the fact that this kind of the tender commission already took care of the first part of this tender, and actually they came up with the rating of the potential candidates. As of today, 12 o'clock today, we still are almost 1.5 months. We have been waiting the results of the special verification in order to submit to the president the list of 10 candidates for his approval. And now the work of this commission is again paralyzed, and we are not sure that it will restart its operation, its work in the near future. Speaking about the adoption of the secondary legislation, we have to mention here and note here that a lot of work has been done, and the major rules regarding the revision, the conditions that were adopted by the Commission, but also we can know the following fact. For example, the Commission came up with a statement that yes, they adopted the regulation, the rules of licensed activities regarding distribution of electric power and the supply of electric power. And the Commission declared that since May 1, the licensees have to come and take this license, obtain this license, because the date for this unbundling and the beginning of regulation to companies in the market, one dealing with the distribution, another with the supply of electric power, it's planned for the second half of this year. But we cannot see a single steps to be taken by anybody, and we don't know who this beginning of the process of unbundling depends upon. So just show us the person who we have to approach and say we have to start, we need some help, what we have to do. But neither the minister, nor the commission, nor the owners, nor the council of the market, they are not doing anything, just waiting for something to happen. And something what we can hear from the company that they cannot actually start this work because there are some financial and legal hindrances or barriers on the way to launch this work. We still lack some of the legislation to take care of this unbundling. We don't know how the finances will be delegated or to another party, etc., etc. But again, even what those entities we have, they do not have influence on this. So everybody is talking about that. The date, we already passed the end date, but we have this ticket. We do not know where we have the punching mechanism just to let's say to make this ticket valid, so to say. So maybe this year, at least the second half of this year, we have to focus our effort on those issues, and at the same time we have to take into consideration, by all means, our consumers, the consumers of electric power, because we had a negative experience in the gas sector, in the gas sphere, when they introduced this payment for a kind of subscribers, or whatever they call it, the subscribers payment. Our citizens call that, and certain things were introduced in such a way, that was the people continued not to agree and not to accept those novelties, so to say. And the gas consumers number is not, they are not as numerous as the electric power consumers, but anyway, next year we are going to have some political events like the elections, and we have a lot of doubts that this reform specifically in the sphere of electric power supply, and that this reform will become valid, will become effective in due time. One more bottleneck regarding the cost. I mentioned already, we bought the ticket, but we did not calculate the cost of this process. In the electric power sector, this is a special, painful issue if you're talking about the legal commitments. Settlements, 3.5 billion hryvnia are accumulating. We also have the old debts or indebtedness, which can be repaid or redempted only if we adopt the respective law. The Minister of Fuel and Energy is responsible for this process. There are very difficult negotiations, as far as I know, with the Minister of Finance. They have their own concept. The Minister of Energy, they have their own concept. Again, there are no controller who can approach and say, okay, knock on the door and say, let's resolve this issue. We are just sitting on our hands. We stopped. We do not move ahead. And there are certain achievements regarding, let's say, repayment of the debts associated with the so-called ATO zone. At least they have some concept. And all the rest has been stopped. And we do not have the traffic controller, we do not have the specific directions where we are going to move, etc., etc. As regards the technical means, which have to be still decided. This is one of the easiest issues. We have the program to provide the jump for the operator of the electric power market. Here we can say that there is certain progress achieved and people really work there, but we know who we should approach and who is responsible for what. Also, we mentioned that we have to start training the traffic, the street traffic rules, for example, right? If you issue a special book or a booklet of rules, you still have to study those rules. And since there are a lot of players in this market, we have to provide this training in a systemic way. We need some kind of the training coordination center which will take care of this among the employees of the generator and the Ukrenergo company. And again, the industrial consumers have to be involved in this process in order to understand how to live and operate under conditions of new market and what are the rules which they have to follow. I'm not talking about the other consumers, I mean, which this market had to reach in 2020, but again, in this specific area, the transition period will be longer, but we still have to work with those consumers as well and to explain to them what would be the conditions and problems they may encounter. Also, we would like to demonstrate another jam, which is also important. I'm talking about competition in the market, where the market can operate without competition. We are talking about different companies which exist today, energy companies. There is a very good project based on which Ukrenergo operates, our integration with and we are talking about increasing the cooperation in this market with our European partners. Maybe in this sphere we have a wide road which we can embark upon. I'm talking about the establishment, or let's say, the bilateral trade with our partners, where the electric power is cheaper than in Ukraine. So this is huge European market. And this is really our direction, our road, which we have to follow. And together we can actually take care of creating this necessary competition in the market. Just a few words about the coal industry and the nuclear power sector, which we also about which we report. We achieved the biggest progress. We have a very systematic work, also including the Chernobyl NPP area. You all are aware about the achievements, how the Chernobyl zone is being developed, how this project has been implemented, about the storage of the spent nuclear fuel. But still, this market doesn't have enough funds in order to preserve, to keep the necessary level of the nuclear safety and safety in this market. Speaking about the coal sector, we not only do not have any progress here, but again, speaking about our association agreement, our commitments, they are kind of vague. They're not really specific that we have to do something specific, in this specific area. But we hope that this sector and the measures to be taken in this sector will be more clearly reflected in the plan of implementation of the energy strategy, which has been adopted, and the specific issues regarding the coal industry will be kind of will be concentrated in the separate block of issues, because this sector remains to be a sector of high risks. We do not know exactly how this sector is going to be further developed, but we do understand that this is the zone of risk. I would not go there, for example. Thank you, Svitlana. Now the floor is given to Gennadii Riabtsev, independent expert, director of the special projects dealing with the reforms in the oil sector. I would like to kindly ask our experts to stick to the time limits, because we have a lot of people in our audience. We could have a lot of questions from them. Thank you. While in the sector of electric power and gas sector, last year, the year before the last one, we had some considerable, let's say, achievements. But again, speaking about the oil sector, in addition to some obvious achievements, the situation in that sector actually they slow down the implementation of many international commitments of Ukraine, and we cannot expect real big progress in this sector. In 2017, they adopted the strategy of Ukraine till the year 2025, and they actually approved new rules for the development of the oil and gas fields regarding the hydrocarbons, etc., etc. They introduced interactive maps of the minerals, and they approved the license conditions for the transmission and transportation of oil and gas using the existing pipeline grid, and also the process of creating the oil reserves in Ukraine. But despite all those achievements, the last year's report of the Secretariat of Energy Community shows that Ukraine have not actually took care of any commitments in the oil sphere. Why so? Because we have some specific research and scientific achievements. There are several reasons, in my opinion. First of all, the plan of activities of the executive bodies in Ukraine make provision not for the resolution of a certain problem, for example, achieving a certain result, but development of the draft legislative acts. That's why immediately after their development, they believe that their task has been already done. And those draft documents actually require additional elaboration. For example, in there's Nadra, they report about it, they prepared 39 prepared draft laws. So 37 of those 39 were returned for further elaboration because they did not correspond to the necessary conditions. Number two, because of the low quality of those developed, drawn up documents, they did not stick to the necessary requirements of the executive bodies. They tried to bypass the established procedures, initiating the submission of the similar draft laws by some of the MPs. So if we are going to analyze in the future the draft laws number 7348 or 7543, you have to know that those draft laws were not agreed upon by any of the central institutions in Ukraine, but they tried to prove those with the violation of the procedure of approval of such documents, which including regulations of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. Number three, we more and more often hear about the approval of some of the decisions, despite the fact that those decisions are still being worked upon. And recently, I heard that they were adopted the new, let's say, amendments regarding the special permissions to be issued regarding the utilization of special ground fields, or let's say the earth's bowels, but still they are on the additional coordination or agreement on the part of the executive bodies. Another decision was adopted on October 25 last year, the plan of measures to be taken to implement the association agreement, which was published only in the end of February this year, when some of the dates have expired, which actually were regarding the responsible executive body. They did not analyze the reasons why they could not observe the necessary dates, though the resources for the implementation of the respective task for the future periods, there are no resources provided for. So they continued this way, the approval of the respective law on the Baur or the regarding all products or control of the fuel stations and fueling stations, etc., etc. And so the achievements in the whole sector exist, as I mentioned before, but implementation of Ukraine of this of their commitments is impossible if the above-mentioned problems are not resolved. What we can expect this year? We can expect that this year they will find the, let's say, the bypass roads in the three major directions. Number one, the creation in Ukraine of minimum reserves of oil and oil products. At last, in Ukraine, we have a locomotive, which was mentioned by Svitlana, in electric power sector, if it's still not existing. Regarding certain problems, we have initiatives of the state reserves, which must be supported, maybe with some remark, with some comments, with necessary introduction of some of the amendments. It should be noted that owing to the existence of such locomotive, we start to do something regarding the creation of the minimum reserves of those products in Ukraine. The second problem, and the second direction of our movement, is the introduction of the respective system of provision of the safety of oil products. And here we do not have, and this required locomotive. The central authorities try to, let's say, to delegate the responsibility, or just to avoid the responsibility for the implementation of those things which have been fixed in the association agreement. Under such conditions, we cannot expect the fast resolution of such problems. And respectively, the implementation of the directive conditions number 70 and 32, we can't expect that this will be done in the near future. And at last, the third direction is associated with the production or the recovery of oil from the gas condensate. Unlike the first direction, where we have locomotive, the state reserve, and the second direction, where nobody just wants to undertake the responsibility, here we have, we can say, a kind of the, let's say, brake, which slows down. I mean, all the components of this direction. And this is the state geological mineral reserves. There's GeoNadr, and this service cannot unblock, let's say, the holding of the tenders or auctions for new gas areas or issuance of new licenses, including those to be issued to the companies, for them to continue their production efforts, recovery efforts. In these directions, there are no clear landmarks which we could visualize today from here to the horizon, as they say. And that's why the oil sector remains to be one of those directions for implementation of the association agreement, which in the reports of our foreign partners and our own reports is mentioned as the sector where we have the least possible progress achieved. I mean, thank you. Now let's talk about the energy efficiency and social issues. Yulia Cheberiak, analyst of the housing energy from the OPORA network. May I remind you about the time limits? Thank you. Generally speaking, we can say that over the last year, the situation is not that disastrous as we could expect, let's say this sphere of energy efficiency and social issues, but despite the positive aspects in this direction, we have some bottlenecks or jams. Speaking about, in addition to jams, I would like to speak about some positives. The approval of the ESCO mechanism in the budgetary sphere, this becomes more and more popular, owing to some training efforts in different regions directly regarding the eco design was implemented. We have to still take care of some of the regulatory acts, but they have been already drawn up, and in the near future they will be approved. But taking consideration last year was positive from point of view of adoption of all the necessary draft law from the energy efficiency package. The bylaw or the base is slowly being developed slowly in a very, I would say, untransparent manner. The public bodies violating all the requirements of the cabinet ministers, they actually come up with the bylaws beyond the boundaries, beyond the sphere of the attention of the public at large. And that's why when we have the situation when the adopted laws are being published, and the number of the experts have a lot of comments, remarks, and let's say, and objections, I would say. But unfortunately, the respective minister does not heed to us, and we are talking about such a law about the commercial accounting of the communal services, and the law on the energy efficiency of the buildings and structures, in addition to the fact that they are being drawn up in a very untransparent manner. There is a number of the draft laws, they are being taken care of with a delay actually they are too late regarding the dates or the deadlines adopted. For the second year now, we've been hearing when the head of the profile ministry said that in the first quarter of 2017, this year, we already heard that in the second quarter of this year, they found the Foundation of Energy Efficiency will start its operation, and this is going to be one of the biggest financial, let's say, contribution to the housing fund. But the situation is not really brilliant because, as I mentioned before, the bylaws are being developed or drawn up without the participation of the public at large, and they are being published several weeks after their adoption. By the way, in the end of April, they had to sign the technical agreement with the European Union regarding given to the Ukraine 50 million this year and 50 million next year for the Energy Efficiency Foundation, but so far we do not know any results regarding the signing of this technical agreement. Next, JAM is another urgent problem, monetization of the, let's say, the easy terms, or let's say the benefits for the societies. You know, in the end of last year, we mentioned that that was one of the victories we achieved regarding the bylaw, regarding the monetization of the benefits. As you know, at the beginning of this year, there was a collapse. In particular, if we're talking about the condominium owners who became the hostages of introduction of this kind of monetization and benefits, only owing to the Ukrainian flash mobs and very massive movement, they managed to actually to knock on the door of Minister of Finance and Minister of Social Policy to explain to them that the condominiums cannot administer the benefits and subsidies, and those are the authority and the powers of the regional structural subdivisions of social protection. We can speak about some kind of victory in this sphere, because in the end of the day, the profile ministry, they heard the voice of the representatives of the condominiums, and they seemed to understand the situation. They understood that they were not very wrong. But this means that those bylaws were developed with the violation of the regulations of the cabinet ministers. When they adopted it, neither the public at large nor other players were involved. So we had again the situation when the social tension aggravated and the dissatisfaction among the population was very high regarding the implementation of this mechanism. That is why the Minister of Social Policy, during the latest meeting with the condominium representatives, they managed to agree upon the mechanism of the two-stage monetization. During the first stage, I have to talk that the condominiums are not going to administer the subsidies and the benefits, and with the help of the condominiums, they're going to introduce the special cards. But so far, this issue has a kind of declarative nature. The results of those negotiations are not known to us. And the victory in this issue we can regard the adoption of the regulations or provisions regarding the register of subsidies recipients according to the respective resolution. But so far, we do not have understanding that the authorities did not explain how this is going to happen, whether they're going to synchronize this register with other state registers, for example, of the let's say, of the property rights or something like that. So this is a so-called victory, but the results, okay, we should not emphasize or place an emphasis on this because we don't know what is going to happen next. So one of our proposals have resolved this issue. We should establish some kind of coordination center which would coordinate the efforts in this issue. Because we have an impression that all the ministers which are involved in that, but there is no responsibility. None of them bears any responsibility now. So we do not have any other way out but to create such a coordination center. One more important issue in the sphere of energy efficiency is implementation of the warm credits, warm loans program. This is the only financial support for the local population to stimulate the measures in the housing fund, But over the last 4 years, this year we have the worst situation because we already live in the mid-April, but so far the warm loans for the previous years have not been issued. This is associated with some bureaucratic hindrances in approval of this project, but for some reason my Minister of Finance doesn't approve the necessary steps in the targeted assistance to be given. We would like to recommend the improvement of the discipline in speeding up the procedure of adoption of the regulatory acts, one of the way out of the development situation. If financing of the steps and measures in the housing sphere is shifting the money from one of the funds to the warm loans, because energy efficiency fund, because this year we cannot expect the first product from that fund because we do not have the tender yet, we do not have the necessary counsel or algorithm how we are going to obtain the funds, and we still do not know all those things. Thank you. So now I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, Natalia Andrusevych. She's going to we have this Skype connection with her. Natalia, can you hear us? Do you copy us? Good afternoon. Yes, I copy you. We have very strict rule. Everybody has to stick to the observed time limits because we have a lot of people in the audience. So please, if you can talk on the topic of the environmental protection, but unfortunately we cannot see your face in the slides regarding the gems or the bottlenecks in this sphere. Thank you very much. Once again, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Very briefly, I would like to share with you my opinion regarding the progress and the gems in the sphere of environmental protection. Unlike what has been said by my colleagues in this energy sector, that we observe some kind of slowing down, but in the sphere of environmental protection, we have the opposite situation. We observe over the last couple of years further animation and progress. If you're talking using the traffic terms, the situation in the ecological sphere, the most ecological means of transportation is the bicycle, and we can say that back in 2017 started to let's say to rotate the pedals, let's say the bicycle more quickly, and despite the traffic jam, not only traffic and vehicle drivers understand the rules. The same can be said about the pedestrians. We have a lot of different stakeholders, the public bodies and the business entities, and who do not really understand the new rules and the need for the transformations which are required to achieve the progress in the environmental sphere. Speaking about the year 2017 and the progress in this ecological block, definitely the champions here we had the water sector with the development of necessary bylaws which are required for the implementation of adopted law regarding the introduction of integrated approaches to manage the water resources based on the basin approach, and the ways where we have when they adopted the comprehensive strategy. Speaking about the directives which we monitor within the framework of this project and this initiative, we should mention as an achievement the adoption of the law of Ukraine on the assessment of the environmental impact and the reduction of the emissions from the big incinerators. And in this context, speaking about the law of Ukraine and the environmental, let's say, impact assessment, we started this work. Of course, we face some problematic issues associated with implementation of the law, especially at the regional level, but maybe it's too early to talk about that as a problem. We have to wait a bit, at least another 6 months, and then we will have an opportunity to talk about that. Speaking about the reduction of the emissions from the big incinerators, we have to come up with the regulatory and legal base in order for this plan to be not just a document and put in some drawer, but be a real document which works. We also have to mention the lack of such an important tool as the strategic ecological assessment implementation of the bird and the habitual director. We achieved certain progress in those issues. We know that we already adopted, and the President of Ukraine already signed the law on the ecological impact assessment. That this is a certain test in order regarding our preparedness to introduce the European approaches, in particular by the Parliament. But the law actually has a very problematic issue, which I would like to demonstrate today or mention among those gems which we have. I mean, the public at large and their involvement. We would like to. We must raise this issue. For the purpose of this law, the notion of the public at large is meaning the registration, whether we are talking about the public organization or NGO or the legal entity, which is the opposite to the different European conventions, and you all know what I mean. What can it mean in practice? This can further make it more difficult, the implementation, and the development and implementation of different programs. The Analytical Center, which has been established in Lviv, for example, they're going to negotiate different programs regarding the preservation of the Black Sea. We can be excluded from this process. Maybe we have to regulate this issue specifically by some amendments to be introduced in this law, or maybe by some bylaws or the necessary legislative basis, which is going to be drawn up. Another problematic issue, the lack of the implementation of the bird and the habitual directive, habitat directive, and the Minister of Nature actually came up with the initiative to introduce those directives in Ukraine. This was stated by the Ministry of Ecology, Ostap Semirak, during the meeting, which was dedicated to the announced concept, the introduction of those directives, and the respective draft law. And actually, what we believe, another gem which we would like to demonstrate today, they proposed the draft law, which seemingly is associated to implement this habitat and the bird directive, which is associated with the Emerald network based on the Hague Convention. This is very important for the nature of Ukraine and the Ukraine's implementation of international commitments, but it doesn't have a real close relation to the European legislation. There are some difficulties with implementation of that because Ukraine is not a member of European Union. In its, let's say, the preserves or reserves cannot become the part of the European network Nature 2000. Despite that fact, the government of Ukraine, European Union, could actually come up with some kind of the bilateral agreements or mechanism in order to remove those hindrances or barriers, and so that our natural preserves or reserves could be given some kind of associated status within the framework of this Nature 2000 network. This could be a very daring, let's say, ambitious task for Ukraine. Also, it could be positive if we're talking about the possibilities for funding, financing, which would be open in this case for our natural preserves and reserves. Within the framework of regulation of the GEM, we propose to return to this idea of implementing the bird and the habitat directory European Union, and not only focus our attention to introduce the Emerald network. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for your informative speech. I give the floor to Anastasia Yermakova, who is going to add to the topic ecology or environment, let's say, I'm going to talk a bit about the renewable technologies. Last year we introduced more than 200 megawatt of the green capacities, which speaks about the efficient, let's say, restoration or renewal of these areas compared to the previous years. What much expected for a long time by us, and many investors, including foreign ones, started to enter the market. Back in 2016, the picture was absolutely different. We were involved in regular negotiations with the potential investors. We told them how nice prospects we have as implementation of those things in Ukraine. They said, that is very interesting, thank you very much. We have to think about that. Actually, they left the market. The maximum they did were small projects for several megawatts just to see what would happen out of that. While in 2016 was the year when the investors were just trying to follow and see what happens in this market. Next year was the year when the investors actually start to move from just observation to some specific actions to be taken. Of course, there are some technical problems. There are problems with the connection, etc. But we didn't have any problems with the huge jams, which my colleagues were talking about, which were slowing down the whole process. That's why the traffic, in this sense, was not bad at all. But even in those, that speed, those tempos are not enough in order to implement the national plan associated with the renewable source of energy. For example, last year, the total capacity, including the different power stations, was a bit more than 74 megawatts. Without the hydroelectric stations and the accumulating electric stations, it was even less than that. That's why we have the issue how to pay for those capacities, owing to the green tariff. The entities which occupy 7% in the energy market, they get this kind of revenue, 7%. The more the facilities we have of this kind, they will have bigger revenues up to the level of 15-17%. Now we have an acute issue of the scheme of support. Whether we are going to have the green tariffs or green auctions, and the issue which was tabled during the previous years, they were not very specifically discussed, but now it was postponed to the year 2018. In my opinion, this is going to become one of the major issues during this year's discussion regarding the further development of the renewable source of energy in Ukraine. Thank you, Anastasia. And our last expert, Andrii Bilous from DiXi Group, who is going to talk about the business screening situation with the regulator. Thank you. My colleagues already mentioned the speed of reforms in other sectors, in particular in the market of the natural gas and electric power, when they introduce the European rules on functioning, but however, they cannot function properly in case we do not have a powerful regulators. We are talking about the National Commission, which exercising the state and the public regulation in the sphere of the public services, and the Anti-Monopoly Committee. In this context, our group follows the implementation of certain articles in the association agreement. If we compare the dynamics this year and the previous year, the speed slowed down. I'm going to save your time and not going to abuse your time. I'm going to speed up my speech. Reforms in the NERC, what we have to do this year to finish the rotation. We expect that this is going to be implemented in the last year, but because of the big delay on the part of the administration, presidential administration, and the part of the parliament and the cabinet ministers, and they had to take care of the competition of the tender commission. They had to select new regulator. It was formed not in the beginning of the 2017, but in the end of that year. As a result, in the end of the previous year, we had an efficient regulator. We actually lost the forum. We had less than 4 members in the commission. Next task which had to be implemented is to ensure the financial independence of NERC. While previously the budget of the Commission was filled from the general fund of the state or the public budget, the new law on NERC provides the filling the budget by the special contributions from a special fund, Last year, the NERC actually adopted all necessary bylaws, and they stick to observe those necessary procedures. They did in time. They submitted for the consideration of the Verkhovna Rada the respective proposals and documents, and this kind of the estimate actually was included in the state budget for 2017. The only thing they had to do to approve the amendments to the existing budget. But this is not a very big task. Next, regulator, the Anti-Monopoly Committee. Last August, the law on the public assistance to the economic entities became valid. To prevent the access of some of the entities to the state budget, there was a case launched by Energy Community back in 2014 that we had to regulate this issue, and we had this respective law, and responsible for the implementation of that law was the Anti-Monopoly Committee, AMC. And last year, the bylaw base actually was adopted completely. They have still to adopt several bylaws, but anyway, that means that there is some delay, because everything has to be done by August last year. But our group also registered the following, call it back. Then AMC actually just had to start in those days to take care of the assessment of the mechanism of this public aid, state aid, those who had to, let's say, to take care of this special aid, they had to approve all the necessary mechanisms to be introduced, and whether speaking about who can take this, obtain this help, aid, or who do not. But they didn't start to who is eligible, who is not eligible, We believe that the MC doesn't have enough institutional capacity in order to ensure the necessary communication, either through the website or the portal of the public aid. What we can propose for this year, number one, to pay attention to, or to draw attention of the government to the institutional capacity of MAC, Anti-Monopoly Committee, in the end of 2017. They had more than 20 vacancies in their committee, and the head of the departments, their deputies, etc., etc. And if we compare it with the total number of the employees in this MC, that means that they still lack about 10% of the 10% of vacancies exist today, and the low level of salaries. If we compare with the NERC, the average salary was in NERC more than 40,000 per year. In MSC, the average salary is about 25,000 hryvnia, almost twice as less. So the MC has to, what they have to do? To start to further complement, the portal, the public aid. Thank you. We are really happy that the representatives of the Ministry of Energy are here, and since they are the major authority responsible for the implementation of the association agreement in the sector of the energy sector, and our cooperation with the energy community. Thank you very much for your comment here. We would appreciate your comments. Maybe you can add something. Maybe you can actually object to something, But Mr. Novak, Deputy Director of the Department, Head of the Department of Investment Policy, of the Department of Strategy Development and Investment Policy of the Ministry of Energy.
Good afternoon, dear friends. I would like to briefly add about the changes and about the implementation of the European legislation. You know that the energy strategy was adopted and the ministry recently works and we now at the final stage of the development of the roadmap concerning the first stage, and here we have people who actively participated in this process. We created the working group expert council, we carried out a seminar headed by the Vice Minister Question, and everyone could provide the recommendations and proposals. We had a meeting to discuss the comments about the first stage, and also the decision was taken that until the end of this week we have to work on some issues, and until the end of the week the Ministry of Finance and the Fiscal Service and other stakeholders, we together with them will regulate these issues, and maybe at the end of this week or at the start of the next week we will provide this document about the first stage to the Cabinet of Ministers about also the plan of measures to reduce the missions, and also the ministry worked on this document and we provided to the first Vice Minister, and also it will be provided for the adoption by the government. Also, so these are the key documents we work on in order to launch the process, because a lot of processes are connected with these documents, and they are important for the energy sector, and the ministry does everything possible in order to adopt them in the nearest future and to launch them in order that they in order to work on the next measures. And maybe you know that key laws were adopted, the law on energy, electricity, on gas, on regulation of communal services, and I won't go into detail about it. And if you have questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we work according to our agenda. We have enough time for questions and answers. Let's start Q&A session, please. Mikhail Valnetsy, head of independent trade unions, and I was in Brussels, and we had the meeting, and I'm a member of civil society concerning European integration, and we met with the members of Social and Economic Committee and with the representatives of the European Commission and the European Parliament, and they were dissatisfied because they do not see the results in the reform of the energy sector. And I would like to, I understand that time is limited, and I would like to speak about electricity. So this is connected with the import of the coal from abroad, and the import increased, import of coal increased, and the prices are really high. And at coal enterprises there was delay in payment of salaries, and there are strikes, and there is no social dialogue. There is corruption in coal sector. Vladimir Novak, the representative of the ministry, is competent, but there are no specialists, there are no competent people, and decisions are connected with corruption, and there are people, supervisors from the parliament, from the cabinet of ministers, that rob this industry. And we name them, and there is no reaction to this. We address anti-corruption bodies, and they do not provide response. I write letters to the Prime Minister, and I didn't get any answer. And the representative on fighting corruption came here, and he sent a letter, and then he said that you should provide all the documents about corruption and so on and so forth. So he believes that I have specialists. He believes that I should disclose all the information about corruption in the ministry or at the cabinet of ministers. So I would like to say that in the civil society sector there are also many problems, and people said that in the coal sector there is great social dialogue and energy reform. This is not about you. So we understand whom I'm talking about. And about why the miners block the border, why they are not paid salaries, and why directors appoint those who are in their families. They live in occupied territories, and they have the task to rob, to destroy the industry, and no one is responsible for this, and no one can overcome this corruption, and we won't go further into the reforms if you do not want to hear about it, Olena. But in the European Union, they listen carefully about these problems. In order to, you know, that we have less, in order to stop this, I would propose in this situation, in this difficult situation, first of all, to look at the plan of actions. In order that Europeans could help us to control those things I've mentioned. In the plan of actions, what it envisages to privatize the coal enterprises, but no one wants to do this because they won't be able to rob, to steal, and in the energy. And they wanted to close 48 mines, and we have only 49, and 33 mines are in the state property. So this is the approach to energy strategy. We understand who wrote it and who will be responsible for this and for all this lack of success. So this was done with many mistakes, and maybe some people try to avoid to discuss this issue because I am present here. Thank you, Mikhailo, for your comments. Do you have questions to experts? Please. Good afternoon. First of all, I have a lot of questions. So I represent a newly created association of the solar energy. So the first question to you, because you've told us about the renewable sources of energy, but we would like to have more specific information, specific answer. You said that there are only 2%, but it is actually 1.6%, so less. You said that 2018, that this will be the year when new mechanisms such as auctions will be provided and the green tariff will be used, whether it will be in 2018 or 2019, and what it will be and who should be involved. And also I have a question to Svitlana. What body will influence on the process in order to implement those obligations, because many specialists, when people speak among themselves, many specialists believe that those deadlines won't be made. I mean in the sphere of electricity market. Let me start. So first, we cannot say what strategies should be adhered to because specifics is lacking. Concept of Letsetsky about green auctions, this concept is now discussed by the public, and the introduction, they introduced changes to this concept, and we want to have clear discussions and grounded decisions based not only on some separate views. There should be negotiations between all the stakeholders in the market, and everything should be based on some clear facts, some clear analysis, and so on and so forth. That's why now I cannot tell you whether we should do it like this or like that. I believe that we should discuss the options, because if there is such an issue of payment for capacities, so this problem should be resolved. We cannot keep silent about it. Thank you. Thank you. About who will be responsible. The responsibility is distributed between the ministry, the regulator, and the companies, Ukrenergo, and the energy market enterprise. And we need a communication center, and it should have more influence on the decisions, and also should implement administrative measures against those who violate rules and do not implement some decisions of the Cabinet of Ministers or Coordination Center, even the implementation of laws. So there was a practice when there was some public, not punishment, we cannot say that this was punishment. This was a public condemnation of a person, for example, if this person doesn't do something that is within the responsibility of this person. So we believe that there should be proper personal measures, and I would advise this. Next question, please. Good afternoon. Mikhailo. The issue of coal industry, maybe we should leave it for a later time. So, Ganalach, current systems analyst, we develop software for the new market. We developed the mass platform that is indicated in your report. I have a comment on how Ukrenergo implements reforms, and a small question to the ministry about the implementation of the reform. We do not assess positively the implementation of the reform. The electricity market law was adopted in June and introduced nearly a year ago, and the tender for the development of software is not completed. So I'm not joking. Ukrenergo needed about a year in order to just buy software that is standard and used in many European countries. After adoption of law, they needed to have 3 or 4 months in order to announce a tender. But they had European consultants, and they had all the requirements, and also many changes were introduced to tender documentation. Some changes were really important, and others were inappropriate. So the last changes that delayed the tender, they rejected the European experience requirement for the software companies, and they said that the companies should use the Ukrainian, Russian standards, GOSTs, and for us it was really strange. If we try to be with NSOE, what will give us what benefit will be provided to use the experience of the
Початися з 1 січня.
Guatemala, for example. So the introduction should happen in 2019. We have experience in Europe, and now we have only a month for the development of the software, and we 100% sure that they will be in delay. So I have a question to the ministry. Do you have a plan what to do in case Ukrenergo won't be able to meet the deadline? Will the law be changed, or you will force them to adhere to the legislation? About this question, I can answer to it. So this law on state procurement, the responsible for the tender is Ukrenergo, and if you have some questions about legality of some actions, there is an anti-monopoly commission. You can bring this case to court. If you have some complaints that someone did something wrong, you can address the ministry. There is a Department of Internal audit and counter-corruption corruption department. So if you have some issues, if you understand that there are some violations, we will respond on this. Concerning the deadlines, the head of the enterprise, he is responsible. He understands that these requirements should be met, and he is responsible before the minister. What can I say? I believe everything will be implemented. Let me ask Novak, could you tell us about the duration of the tender at the Ministry of Energy? Signing and preparations and everything else. What is the duration, overall duration? So the ministry does not deal with the tenders directly. I understand. If the minister is, if the ministry is the holder of the budget funds, carry out tenders, that's one situation. And if it is about enterprises, the situation is different. So there is a yearly plan of procurement. There are Prozoro and other platforms, and we understand clearly those who worked in this area or participated in the tenders, that this procedure can be long, and it is connected with the procedure of appeal. There is an anti-monopoly commission that review these complaints in case something happens. But if there is acceptance and some days pass and the document is signed. Good afternoon, Alexandra Avdiyenko, Gas Association. I have a question to Mr. Bilous and one question to Roman. So we know about initiated by the Prosecutor's General Office about the cases to cancel the agreements for the servicing of gas distribution networks, and the agreements were concluded in 2013, and now these agreements they are not valid, and those enterprises that signed them, these enterprises are fined. Do you believe whether it will improve, whether it improves business climate in Ukraine, this initiative, or not? And especially investment climate. And to Roman, in your report, you touched upon the topic about the tariff formation for gas distribution networks, what it should be, and about the payment for capacity. Does it have any sense? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to comment on both issues, whatever pertains to the contracts or the economic, let's say, activities for everybody to understand. We are talking about the use of the regional gas entities of the networks belonging to the government of Ukraine. We had the free use based on the, let's say, economic activities after 2015. This provision was cancelled. I mean, the free use for 2 years. They were working on drawing up the respective resolution. In 2015, there was a campaign to revisit the existing contracts or agreements, which made provision for the certain payment to be introduced for using those networks. Speaking about the contracts cancellation of the contracts, this issue is going to be resolved in the courts, and retrospective, let's say, operation of that, if it does contradict the law, it has no basis on the grounds for that. Speaking about the use of the distribution, public distribution network, this issue should be readdressed to the government, since they already had all the necessary base, including typical contracts dealing with the use of those networks. Speaking about the tariffs for the gas distribution, last year the regulator twice attempted to introduce a separate or special payment for the distribution, and both attempts failed. The first case because of the lack of communication. The second attempt, was kind of a follow-up of the first one, a continuation of the first one. The discussion still continues of that issue, and they actually initiate the further discussion of that. I mean, the regulator, as far as I know, they consider not the technical issues of the, let's say, the ordered or required capacity or connection, whatever else, and whatever pertains to the population which use only gas as an energy carrier. Of course, they would not. I believe we need another discussion because this is a very sensitive issue. And it seems to me there must be some kind of differentiated approach regarding certain group of consumers must be fixed payments. For other group of consumers must be a kind of differentiated approach, the payment for the capacity used. Thank you, Yulia Cheberiak, first deputy chairman of the Ukrainian Energy Assembly. I do not have a question. I have a proposal to make, addressed to two speakers, Svitlana Holikova and Andrii Bilous. Number one, we should organize some additional road in order to overcome the barrier on the market of electric power, cancellation of the cross subsidies. I don't know why we forgot about that. And number two, the newly established and I believe efficient NERC committee, which has in the nearest future to make public their position, speaking about the tariff policy for 2018-2019, at least what they're going to do with the cross subsidies, not only for the population, but generally speaking on the market of electric power. Until now, reforming of the electric power market will...
Буде в сирій зоні.
Okay. Well, after its relaunching, we have to demonstrate some plan of their work or the plans, how they're going to deal further on with that. Would you like to comment, anyone? Svitlana, I would like first of all to thank you. This is really in the context what we were talking about, the indebtedness or the settlement or the repayment of debts. But we cannot do that without resolving the issue of cancellation of cross-subsidizing. That's just one of the element of those things. But one of the major issues, how to stop further accumulating new debts, and without certain steps is impossible to do. Speaking about the regulator, I can say a few words. Since I'm a secretary of the Competition Tender Commission, last Friday there was another meeting of this commission. We considered the application of 22 more candidates, and those applications were canceled. Tomorrow we are going to consider new applications for 3 more candidates, whether they should be allowed to take part in that competition or contest or not. So the intrigue is still there. So please follow closely our work. So by the way, the Competition Tender Commission, Competition Commission, okay, tries to make sure that the public at large is involved in this process. If there is any chance to come up with some additional comments or explanation, you can always address those to the competition committee. If you have any doubts in this or another candidate, we are very open, and we will be prepared to hear those comments and remarks. More questions, please. I'm an expert in the oil and gas sphere. Very short question, perhaps addressed to Mr. Roman. Mr. Roman, thank you very much for very useful information shared with us. and I believe you had a kind of very broad approach to the situation in this sphere. But, you know, the association agreement is just not the list of the Ukrainian commitments. Those are mutual commitments. So mostly we heard today, for some reason, implementation of the Ukrainian commitments. But what do you think? The European Party, do they actually fulfill their commitments? If we are talking about the interests of Ukraine, in particular the interest in the gas transmission sphere, unbundling. Okay, the second question. I understand it this way, that you believe, and you're correct in believing that there shouldn't be a threat to reforms. But is it possible, speaking in principle, I mean, to resolve this issue before the transit contract is over or is finished? Do you visualize any possibility for that? And a very short question indeed. You used the term transit to the provision of transit in this context. Is it correct to do? I understand the association agreement doesn't include such a term as transit. Actually, in European legislation, they do not have such a term, transit. Maybe we should say goodbye to such term as well. And maybe we should use the term transportation, transport, since we are in the same European space, and we try to follow or to fulfill the European legislation. I believe it would be only logical to exclude the term transit and replace it with the term transport or transportation. I believe, yeah, I know. We can, in order to utilize our reliable gas transportation system for the years to come. Thank you. I'll start with your last question. Indeed, I use the term transit in the context, exclusively with the context of contract, because contract speaks about transit. Unfortunately, we cannot use the existing system of capacities, which is the input, output of gas point, I mean, and we are talking about the transport or transit of gas through the system. And that's why, unfortunately, at the end of 2019, we'll have the term transit exclusively for the purpose of this specific contract with Gazprom. Otherwise, we're going to talk about transportation based on the well-known principles. Indeed, I would like to confirm that European principles make provision for the free access of all the consumers. We're talking about the movement, so to say, of gas from one border to another border, etc. And here we have to prepare ourselves for the date when the transit contract is over, and actually they will stop to determine the capacities for anyone, including European buyers. For them just to order the necessary services associated with the gas transportation. Speaking about the mutual fulfillment of the mutual commitments, this is a two-way street, you know. We are persuaded that we can rely upon the European Union. In the beginning of March of this year, when we had the efficiency deficit in the system, Ukraine efficiently used the legislation in the sphere of safety of gas supply. The crisis group was summoned together, and they're going to determine whatever pertains to the consumption side of that contract, and we were talking about European Community, etc. They regulated the issues with export, the supply of gas. You're talking about Poland. In this case, this is the way where we can actually efficiently cooperate. In order to exert another pressure on the Gazprom to fulfill the court ruling, we have to pull all our efforts. I mean, all the parties, all the players must step in, you know, to persuade them to do that. Speaking about the bundling model, the gas transportation system operator. There are some models which make provision for the fact when the operator may remain in the structure of the vertical integrated system. But this is one of the options which can be negotiated or discussed. This option is called ITO, Independent Transport Operator. It's not provided for by our law or our legislation. If we believe it to be the most optimal, for example, during the transition period, we have to introduce some amendments into existing legislation. So this is one of the possibilities or the options. So it can come out from the ownership unbundling as the most efficient system which can simulate competition, but it must be step-by-step approach. For example, some of the steps will be taken before the finishing in 2019. In 2020, this process will be completed. Okay, I can offer my comments regarding the first question. Maybe we can hear the opinion of Mr. Baur, European Union Committee on this. Дуже гарне питання стосовно.
I mean, in a hard sense, these obligations are mostly in the area of trade. Where we have a free trade agreement, that means that both sides, Ukraine and Ukraine, have to open their markets for the respective import of products, and this is being done. In the area we speak about, energy, of course, there are mostly commitments from the Ukrainian side in terms of implementation of European legislation. And that is going in one direction, yes. But that is what we are discussing about. It's about integrating Ukraine into the European market. That is, I think, the objective, not vice versa, not integrating the European Union into the Ukrainian market. Therefore we are speaking mostly about Ukrainian commitments. The European commitments, but are also there. As mentioned, there's the obligation to cooperate, to support in this process of adaptation, and I think we are doing our best. We have a number of support projects to help the adaptation process. As mentioned, we are, for example, supporting with a significant amount of money the Energy Efficiency Fund, which hopefully the agreement can be signed tomorrow. By the Ukrainian government, and of course we are also providing policy advice in this area. And in terms of energy security of supply, indeed we have the obligation through the early warning mechanism, which was applied for the first time in early March. The Commission has reacted, and we are trying our best to support Ukraine also to keep the transit. You have seen maybe a number of statements of the European Commission in that respect, but of course on that question we are not only Ukraine and the European Union, but it's also the Russian Federation, and we cannot do without them. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Я дуже сподіваюся, що
Thank you very much. I do hope that we are going to see the support in the European Union part regarding the adoption and the spreading of the directive to the sea-going pipelines or the sea-bottom pipelines, and maybe this will be done in different formats. I mean, the involvement of Ukraine in those issues. Alex Savitsky, Center of Ecological Initiative. My question is addressed to Mr. Novak regarding the national plan to reduce the emissions. You mentioned that you're working on the project of management of that. You went through a certain process of coordination with the Ministry of Ecology, as far as I can understand. In this context, I have two questions. Who in the final analysis be responsible for the final control of reducing the emissions? Obtain and verify all the emissions coming from the big incinerators? And the second question, how are you going to ensure what mechanisms will be used or are provided for to finance those investment projects in building the facilities for the sulfur treatment and other kinds of treatments, and some companies speak that they do not have mechanisms for funding or financing, and when we have this kind of public resistance and certain pressure exerted, they by some miracle find the necessary money, and they try to introduce necessary projects. So my question is, what is the position of the ministry and other actors or players in this specific issue, and how they are going to finance the measures to introduce or to establish the treatment facilities? Thank you for your questions. Those who understand what we are talking about for the implementation of this national plan to reduce the emissions, the most important cornerstone will be the mechanism of financing. And that's why we came up with a plan of actions for the year 2018, which makes provision that this mechanism has to be created yet. And you perhaps understand yourself that this issue is a very serious one today, and the owners of the thermal power stations are not very much interested to contribute their own money. The mechanism can be different in their form, but we hope that given the support of the European Commission, we'll find the optimal solution to implement that plan, to make it painless for the state budget, because you understand only too well, according to different assessment, we are talking about billion of euros. If we take the experience of other countries, how they moved along those lines, along that road, it's understood that it's impossible to do that very quickly, but we have to work on that so that our children and children of our children could live in the pure and clean Ukraine, and not to inhale those smoky emissions which we can observe flying over the Dnieper River, for example. Who is going to exercise control over the implementation of that and the register? One of the commitments of Ukraine within the framework of the Kyoto Protocol regarding the registers of emissions and the transmission of the pollution to the Orcus Convention. Well, in my opinion, control over monitoring preliminary must be done by the Ministry of Coal. They must obtain statistical data, but the function of control must be shouldered by the public inspectorate, which is now in the final stage of its organization. So you are going to have a separate register regarding the emissions coming from the incinerators, and the operators will actually send the information directly to you. We are working that issue now. This is a debatable issue even today. In other words, you do not have the coordinated position. You'll see the coordinated position when we have the governmental decision part of the government. Again, so there is no ready decision or coordinated decision. Our vision is that the function of control must be shouldered by the ecological control inspector. This is their function. In order to, conditional speaking, if we even assume that this will be done by the Ministry of Coal, we have to take care of quite a big number of serious steps, introducing amendments into legislation to resolve the personnel issue, etc., etc. So the major issue is who has the right of the first access to those data. If decision will be made that this is the subject matter of the ecological inspector, of course we are going to ensure necessary access to those data. Next question, and if there are some, because actually we are almost exhausted our time. So should you have any comments regarding the coal industry, answering the Mikhailov's spec? Okay, I have a question to Mr. Roman. Did DiXi Group assess the proposal regarding the gas directive, which was mentioned today, regarding expansion its activities on Nord Stream 2? Are you going to introduce interconnector or some other important differences? If so, how do you assess the participation of Ukraine in all this? Because, the process is actively underway now, and the question to Minister of Energy, Vladimir, do you have the coordinated position in the ministry regarding the gas directive, which actually touch upon very important for Ukraine issues? I would like to specify that those amendments were supported by the European entities. We are talking about to remove the certain gaps in introduction of the third energy package of EU. We are talking about those pipelines which sea-going pipelines coming from the third parties towards the borders of the European Union. If you are talking about the ground pipelines, this is absolutely applicable, at least in the interconnect points. Speaking about the sea pipelines, it depends how far the maritime law covers this, whether this is territorial waters or the free economic zone, And I believe this is a positive proposal of the part of the European Commission, targeted at, I'd put it this way, so that certain countries do not manipulate this issue and do not try to seek for themselves some kind of the exception from the rules from the European Union legislation, which is applicable to the whole territory of the European Union. And we are not talking about the pipelines which are being built by the Russian Federation Gazprom, but also other pipelines which might go towards the European Union. This issue has been discussed today. There are different opinions. Of course, the final voting will take place in the European Union Council, where all the member states will be represented, and the European Commission and Ukraine have to work in order to persuade those countries that those amendments are absolutely necessary. They will further strengthen energy security of European Union. Mr. Novak, thank you for your question. I can say only one thing, that we are working on this specific issue. Well, as far as I understand the official position, we are going to, whenever we can actually voice, when we can. I can add to that, in fact, there is a very quick answer to your question. According to the rules of the European Union, the party which is the supplier of the gas cannot be the transit or transportation country. You were talking about the sea pipelines. The supplier will be the country who also transports the gas. Since we have just a few more minutes, I would like to ask the experts to comment on that. Hennadii. And Mikhail, in energy strategy, there is no mention of the number of the mines which have to be shut down. Just a minute. I remember your proposals in actually, generally speaking, as regards the coal sector. There were several tasks outlined the major measures to implement the strategic objectives in the coal sector. I'm not going to mention all of those, I'm going to talk about those which you mentioned. Restructuring of the sector in preparation of the promising coal mines, in the elimination of those mines which are not, let's say, cost effective. And the reorientation of the state support for the labor protection of the environment, restructuring of the coal industry. then elimination of the public wholesale procurement and the regulation of the coal products and the provision for our own production of coal within Ukraine. And then, following, by the way, based on your proposal, which was added to the draft document, actually it was supported by all the developers on measures to shut down the not cost-effective mines will be completed in 2025, and we are going to mitigate the social and the ecological effects. In this, we had to be taken into consideration. I mean, the best international experience and practice to eliminate the negative effects, which makes provision for the compensation for those who are going to be fired. And actually, to cut the long story short, they are going to introduce a mechanism of compensation for those mines which are going to be shut down. They are included in the draft document for the strategy for the first period till the year 2020. It contains the respective provisions. So the trade unions should do everything possible for those tasks to be implemented and not to remain on paper, you know. I cannot hear the speaker without the microphone. Sorry for that.
Вашу ж думку. Правильно на початку. Ми, на жаль, повинні...
Microphone, please. I cannot hear him without the mic. I have a proposal to make. Maybe we can actually finish this event, and you can actually talk with the representative after that. I'm sorry. Can somebody give to Mikhail a microphone? So once again, you had a chance to speak up your mind. We thank you for your position. Expert offered their comments. So my proposal is, if UCMC has time for us to continue this discussion, we can actually continue our discussion with the stakeholders. Unfortunately, we already exhausted our time has been expired, actually. We would like to thank everybody who came here to take part in that. We tried to be as much objective as we could in assessment of the available situation. We'd like to the European Commission representative present here, to all the representative ministers and departments. Would appreciate all your proposals, comments, and we would like to continue your further discussion. And now, Mikhail, you can actually continue your discussion with your issues outside of this session.